Welcome to Teatro del Absurdo. That's Spanish for Theater of the Absurd, a program from Jaguar Bridge Productions. Well, hello, I'm Willow Marvavilla. I'm your hoster toaster, here to unravel, untwirl things that shall not be said. And here we go for part 2 of Teatro Absurdo's Shooting the Breeze. Yeah. Hi, everybody. We're back with Teatro Absurdo, where we talk about things nobody else wants to talk about and the absurdity of everything, but don't commit suicide yet, because I have a very special guest, Fintan, who is currently somewhere hiding in New York. We won't say where, so you can't stalk him. Hi, Fintan. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how we met?
Yeah, sure. My name is Fintan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm from New York City, Lenape lands, Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up and am mostly have been this summer. And yeah, I think we met in 2019, I believe. It was in New York City. We were connected through Zuni Mountain Sanctuary, the Radical Fairies. I had a friend Carrie House, who's been going out there for a while, who's from that region, and invited me out one time. And then I remember talking about my interest in going to Costa Rica with somebody else out there, Ryan, and he brought up your name. And then I reached out and found out you were doing an event in New York, and I came to the event. It was to release your book, and I was very fascinated by the story and the residency that you had in Costa Rica. And I was like, well, I'm already planning to go to Costa Rica, so like that summer. And I was like, yeah, why not come down and visit the residency as well? So that's what I ended up doing. And I spent a few weeks down there with some other artists and painted a mural, worked on some of my animations, and just generally got to know the region and you. So that was a good time. And then I came back last summer as well.
So. Yeah, you did. Which we have an ongoing project we'll talk about somewhere else. It's called Cries of a Jaguar. How do you like people to see you? What do you do? Because you're an activationist. I'm moving away from activist. An activationist. You're certainly involved in the media of film, both personally and to make a living. Any of those you want to talk about? First, let's unpack maybe just a little preemptive work. What do you think film is? I mean, how do you think film is a way for us to see ourselves and to have wider, more complex discussions? And this is beyond, Hollyweird stuff, but take it over.
Yeah, I think, I definitely work in film. I've made films. I mostly work as a video editor. I do animation as well, but I have made a few of my own films. So I watch a lot of films. I engage with film work a lot. And I'd say that I can speak, especially for documentaries, because that's what I am most involved with. I think there's sort of a window into another world for people who maybe don't travel so much. Like I've been privileged to be able to travel as much as I have because my family is sort of scattered around the world. I've got my mother's from Ireland, my dad is from the Midwest, but he has family in Hawaii, and my mom has a sister in Australia. So as a kid, I traveled a lot and got to see different ways of living. And I think documentary film does, when it's done well, is a good way to like start a conversation. Maybe it's not gonna fully immerse you in a topic, but it's a good place to start to then begin to ask more questions and maybe inspire yourself or others to reach out and visit new places and see different ways of life. So I think That's the way I approach it, and that's what drives me to make films, is to just give people that sense of discovery. I think that you sort of get also with travel. So, yeah, does that sort of answer the question?
Everything answers the question.
Yeah.
So I tend to look at, documentary, our a collaborator in this circle is Gracie, who I've already interviewed. We're looking at, how there is a genre of nonfiction. It's a little sort of documentary plus, moving a little bit away from a newsreel sort of oriented reporting and call and response interviewing technique. I like that you speak to animation because I think some of the films, you can speak to two parts of the brain. You can also speak to the soul, right? And sometimes I'm seeing what I'm finding out now is there is film out there now, documentaries that are sort of crossing the bridge of the hemispheres of the brain. So they're speaking through to the creative part, through animation or dramatization, that allows the audience, I think, to be more creative in their understanding of a subject matter, as opposed to just left brain where it's all analytical and this is what happened and this is what happened, and it becomes sensational. So that said, sensational is, I want to honor you because in these circles of conversation, we have some really active people, and these are about conversations with real people, with friends. And I want to just say that, if I can speak to this, you were at Standing Rock and you were also at the Minnesota or the Headwaters. What does it feel like to be an activationist right now? Because I was talking to someone else that I'm going to be interviewing that was in Portland, and they were of the scene that they were so horrified by, I could get emotional. I mean, that absolute danger, painful danger of participating at these manifestations. I don't want to say protests because we're not protesting, we're manifesting. It's more positive. How do you feel as a younger person of this life cycle to participate? I mean, does it feel good? Does it feel scary? How do you walk into it and walk away? Any of that from your experiences?
Yeah, that's been a big question of mine, especially the last part of how do I walk in and walk away, because I am able to walk away. I'm not an indigenous person living in, on Ojibwe lands in northern Minnesota that had a pipeline built through like their basically just ancestral fields where they grow wild rice, and that's their way of living. Like I am able to come in and use my skills for a certain amount of time and leave. And I've done that with quite a few movements. And I think I appreciate this in talking to other people who are also involved in movement work. It's like you can only take so much of this heavy stuff on that you need to sort of, it helps to be able to, step back a bit, take care of yourself. By taking care of yourself and stepping away, you're taking care of other people. So I guess, yeah, I've been thinking about that question a lot. And I went out to, like you're saying, I went out to Minnesota 3 times last year. I was there in 2020 as well, when George Floyd was killed. And I was up just with my partner at the time at a lake house. And that all happened. And we immediately went down to the cities and were immersed in this just very intense militarized scene with the city just sort of burning around us. And it was a scary time. And I think I had a lot of friends who were living there as well. So I sort of just kept coming back out there. I would step away for a bit, recharge, do what I needed to do to make money, and then come back and put my energy into that and make films and cook for people or just whatever was sort of needed at the time. But it was really hard, honestly. Just like there was so much trauma. I think just people, it's just a really intense space. And sometimes people can be sort of drawn to that environment in a unfortunately negative way, in that like they really want to help, but I don't think they've done the work in themselves that allows them to show up in a way that they can, not be a drain on everybody. So I think it was hard with a lot of like really younger than me kids, like college age or even younger sometimes, who are showing up to these movement camps, and where you really have to be aware of everything you're doing, and like, the police could show up at any time, and or there could be infiltrators. Like it's like a really surveilled space. I think just like dealing with these personalities that maybe were sometimes pulling people away from like the true purpose was exhausting. It was really exhausting. And so that's why for me it was important to be able to step away when needed. So yeah, I mean, I haven't done so much of that this year. I've been not living in the country, so that's been a big part, living in a different culture in Spain. But that was very much a part of my life, like from the 2020 last year, and in college when I went to Standing Rock as well. Um, and yeah, I think those are my thoughts on that.
Well, I personally have also participated in certain levels of activism through the years, less personally in the present, just like you, because of location. And also, I think, the degree of participation in these activities has become really brutal. I mean, when I was speaking to this friend in Portland, I mean, they witnessed someone getting shot in the eye with a rubber bullet. Someone actually got killed. And we were sort of doing this crossover between things that I had participated in, which was a lot of anti-war arousals, especially during Bush 1, Bush Daddy, and then Bush 2. And there wasn't like tear gassing, rubber bulleting, tasering, these sorts of things. And I'm sure those have been used at, Vietnam and civil rights. The most they were doing was arresting people by the hundreds, certainly in San Francisco. I mean, I don't know how they do it. They would just arrest like 4,000 people, but they would then begin to process people in courts, which were, I think, one of the most interesting processes, because I don't think we see how the legal system moves sometimes personally. And I witnessed, it was attorneys from Chevron who were operating on the district attorney's side. And then for the public, the people were attorneys that had represented the Black Panthers. And they deliberated for 8 hours in front of us. I think there was 100 people in the courtroom that had been arrested. And the judge was really noble. At the end, he was like, you're wasting my time. First of all, he was kind of pissed. And number two, he was like, these people were responding to a very emotional situation. And I don't know if judges are doing that nowadays, because they've supplanted so many weird conservative people in the judicial system. But he also added, which was really interesting, and these are things I watch for activationists when they're out, is know what you're doing, know where you're at, because the central issue why we were being charged is we blocked and obstructed a public access, which was a road. We sat in front of the federal IRS building, which in fact the judge had researched, which is nice when they actually do that, and found out that the police had been alerted we were coming, so they blocked off the road beforehand. So it didn't set up in court. You had already blocked the road. We just showed up. So these are the types of things. So I want to give a bravo for that. So you were just in Spain, and you were hovering a lot in Madrid, right?
Yes, Madrid is where I was living. Yeah.
Okay. So did you witness any activities around protests or anything there?
Yeah. There's been a lot, especially around the war with Ukraine. I remember one day we were just going out to the club like with friends, and there were all these taxi cabs that had pulled up. Like Spanish taxi drivers from Madrid had driven to the border to pick up families and bring them into Spain. And there was a huge line of them, and the media was there and everything. And it was just like, oh, this is really happening. Wow. It's like I hadn't been so involved in that movement. Like it was sort of, I knew it was happening around me. The movement space that I was involved in this past year was, so my cousin, my Irish cousin, lives just outside of Madrid and with his wife, who's Spanish. And they're really involved in this community garden that started as an occupation of land on basically it's owned by a government, a bad bank, they call it, that bought up, after the financial crisis in 2008, around that time. This bank was tasked with buying up all these properties that were private and were just sort of sitting there speculating, like eventually they're going to be developed upon. But they're worth nothing, or they were worth nothing at that time. So the community went around of this city, Villalba, just outside of Madrid, and was basically like, we're in a housing crisis right now. Why is this plot of land just sitting here empty and nobody can move into it? So they decided to occupy it, start a garden, which is where they're at now. So they're technically still occupying it. They're not legally, allowed to be there, but the government in Spain, I think, has more of that occupation history, and there's a lot of occupied buildings in Madrid too. So they're sort of, if this were to happen in the US, it might be shut down a lot faster, unfortunately. But they're sort of able to just use the community support and make a lot of noise and grow their vegetables and be okay for now. We'll see what happens. But I was going up there once a week, once every couple of weeks to help out. They do a big like lunch. They've had like music, like live events, and sort of raising attention and money for that. So that's been my little piece of action, you could say, while I was in Madrid. Mostly just trying to understand life there and the culture, and it's very different, like learning Spanish and all that. So that was mostly what I was doing.
Great. Well, it seems to me, in my personal history and just watching some of the, alternative media sources, is that when there is a subject in other countries that becomes controversial and affects, larger amount of society, like if you look at Chile, and certainly Spain is one, and France, I'm always astounded how you read the news and like millions show up, and they would bang their pots and pans out the windows, whether it was in Buenos Aires in Argentina or whatever. And then you get people in the United States, like I'm not putting anybody down, but it feels absurd. And you get a hurrah because like 40,000 people show up or 100,000. And I think the rest of the world just looks at it as like, we are the freest fucking nation in the world in some ways to protest. And people just, fair. Or they pat themselves on the back for showing up one time. And, and I really want to emphasize, because I have great friends in Chile, and they showed up day after day after day after day and were beaten and shot at and all sorts of stuff. And I'm not saying this is all okay, yet how do we, the absurdity is, how do we really start to participate on every level? I mean, this is activism right here. This is a way to participate, taking on the larger social media streams, defying it, and the pictures of hamburgers or what you ate for breakfast or something, saturating the social media. But in effect, we can change things. And this is something even I want to speak to in Costa Rica, because, as we were speaking to people, there was a lot of energy around, well, we don't have a military, so, we don't like violence. And part of me was like, actually, there's a lot of violence in your country, and you may want to unpack that and look at ways to start organizing to break the shackles of passivity. And I'll point to, again, back to Chile, their resistance paid off. I mean, to the point they actually were able to stimulate their congressional support to rewrite their constitution. That is fucking so honorable and amazing, because they had been living under a constitution that was developed and written by Pinochet, who was a dictator placed by the USA years ago. So I want to speak to that we can do this, and it doesn't take thousands and thousands of people all the time. It can take a few very noble, persistent people, because we have a lot going on. So that said, what do you feel about social media, and how do we, okay, everybody's afraid because of privacy. I get that. But at this point, I would tell people, I said, look around, there's nothing private anymore. You go to a store, you go to a cafe, there's cameras everywhere. There's cameras on the corners. Every receipt where you buy something goes into a database. And I just want to speak to one thing. Anybody who's out there still, having a good time on Facebook, which is also Instagram, which is also WhatsApp and everything else. I was driving with a friend of mine in, Iowa, and we were driving around Newton, which is just a little west of Grinnell. And in this cornfield area were these huge glass, square, ominous buildings, and in the middle of nowhere. And I said to my friend, I said, Sherry, I said, what are these buildings? She said, oh, that's Facebook's data centers. That's where they have just one of the places they have on the planet where they're storing reams and reams of data, our likes, our dislikes, everything. And she said, how they sold it to bring it to the people here was they said it was going to be all these jobs. But she said in the end, it's just a few data operators and some security guards. But I used to say, so I'm going to toss this back to you about how to take back social media, because I think it has incredible potential. But I've walked out of Facebook. I mean, I keep it because some people only communicate there. But I would say to people, if you're liking and you're sending an algorithm, the absurdity into whatever, and they're watching this shit, politicians and marketing teams on Madison Avenue, everything, and you're liking 500 likes to a salad that somebody has posted at a restaurant, and then somebody is posting about a reforestation project and it gets 5 likes. And I said, it's a way of voting into the system. And I was horrified by our cool friends that I'm like, we need to shift up this like thing, because you're not sending the right messages, because they think we don't care. And it's an opportunity to say, no, motherfuckers, we do care. So do you have anything you want to say to people? Let's break the absurdity spell and let's take back social media. This is a way right here. And so to you.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, because right now I have a job that is literally editing videos for TikTok and Instagram Reels for a podcast. It's for Jay Shetty. He's a health podcaster, and he interviews celebrities about mental health and just sort of well-being and all that. And so my job is to make it appeal more to a younger audience right now, because he has a big following, but not so much on TikTok and Instagram. So that's really important for them. So editing these really punchy, fast videos, that really draw your attention in, using a bit of humor to hopefully inspire people to listen to the whole conversation and talk about it and all that. So it's something that I very much, as someone who doesn't even use TikTok, I barely use Instagram. I don't have a Facebook anymore. I'm not on social media really at all, but I often find myself for my work having to, get into it. And also in the movement spaces, like there's a strong need for social media as well, for especially for fundraising. It's really important for, when we did when I was up at Line 3 in Minnesota, a lot of people got arrested, and that was part of the strategy to get more attention. And so raising money for their court fees and just like transportation and all these things, or to prevent arrestation, that all social media. And I think they were pretty and photos, and they had an active following, and so I was impressed by it. But what was I going to say? I think that it is a powerful tool, and we do need to continue to use it, because a lot of people's, unfortunately, attention is on there. I think I'm always trying to use it to get people to show up in person as much as possible. I think that's a good way, whenever possible, to just use it as a starting point to get people engaged in something, physical, because that's where people can really, do more. It's a good amplification tool, I think. So just finding the most effective ways at like making, interesting, engaging, funny content, but also serious. It's a challenge, because people's attentions are just all over the place. So yeah, it's but it's a fun challenge for me. That's why I like the work that I do right now. So that's what I would say.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we're going to wind this up in about 5 minutes, but I learned something, and I'm, a conversationalist. And I think, speaking to that, some of the social media is in person, right? So if you're at the grocery store, if you're in a car service, I don't want to promote any names, through an app, without imposing on people, checking in the vibe. But I was just in San Francisco, and we were, I was dressed in full pull drag, and we're getting ready to go to the Pride celebration, which that's a whole nother episode. But we had this driver who was from Afghanistan, and in those 20 minutes was the real news. And that's what I'm trying to do, because I know I watch, certain apps and media online, and I'm stimulated by it. So it's a way for us to speak to each other in a very busy world. But in that car, I learned so much about like gay life in Afghanistan, and our privilege and all this stuff, because people are escaping to come to the United States. And we interviewed someone even in Costa Rica that people don't think Costa Ricans are escaping, are trying to, or for a better life. Yet we found someone locally that had jumped across the border 2 times and was imprisoned in the United States. And I didn't find that out on social media. I found it out because I took my car to get repaired one day, and the conversation came up. So I want to just emphasize that wherever we are is social media, right? That's the absurdity. You don't need an electronic device. Here's an electronic device up here. Here's an electronic device here. And use this part here to move particulate and matter and quantum thinking. So if you had any wonderful or absurd experiences recently that you want to send us off with, something that really moved you, a recent conversation, or you saw something that was just so fucking absurd, you're like, why is this still going on? Take it away.
Sure. Yeah, I think I would love to share my experience in Morocco. I went earlier this year to Marrakesh, and I was just walking around, and I stumbled upon this cafe that turns out a lot of queer Moroccans hang out in. It's like a rooftop cafe, and they just go to jam, play music, or play board games. And a lot of like young creative people were there. It's like, wow, this is serendipitous that I just came upon this. I didn't know this would even exist in a city that's, in the Arab world and more conservative, Morocco is definitely a little bit more open than say like Saudi Arabia, but it's still very hard to be out and queer, and you know, a lot of people don't have the acceptance with family or even friends. But it is changing with the younger generation. I think a lot of that actually has to do with social media and like with more you know, European and American TV coming in, which has its pluses and minuses. Anyway, I met this young Moroccan trans man who goes by Sam, and he just sort of introduced me to his family. I went for, it was the first night of Ramadan. I went over to his family's house and had a nice meal. And since then, we've just stayed in touch. And I'm learning about his life, like sort of the challenges that he goes through, like just even saying that he has a girlfriend to his mom. It's like, can't really say that. And he's been like supporting her financially, and also trying to like live his own life and eventually, unfortunately, leave the country, because that's what a lot of young queer people there have to do if they have like ambitions, is go to Europe most likely, or the US. So yeah, I just want to put that out there because it's an experience that I got through travel that I sort of would never have even the conception of like life as a queer person in Morocco. And sure, you can probably find some shows about that maybe, although I don't know really like the current moment where it's at. I think you just sort of have to go there and speak to people. And so I encourage people to do that as much as you can, get out there and see the world and just talk to other people around you, you know. And yeah, I think that's where I want to put that out there. Sam's doing well now, like wants to be an architect eventually, and so we're just going to continue to stay in touch, and I'll keep supporting him from afar, and hopefully go back and visit soon. So
Well, thank you. And there's two things I'll just pinpoint from those last comments. One was, okay, we do see, even in the midst of its controversy, that the good, the bad, the ugly, but some of these more remote regions or more oppressed regions, through social media, are actually seeing, hey, this is not right. What's happening here where we are? And so there's a responsibility then for those of us putting things out to recognize that we're speaking to people that have zero privileges. I mean, for a person in Morocco, I've been there, to come out and for them to even try to celebrate Marrakesh, that could be a death sentence and imprisonment. And we forget that through our woohoo gay pride, you know, drunken stupors, that people fought for these rights, and we could very well lose them again very soon, within months. So I want to thank you so much for all this collaboration that we have done together. And speaking from Teatro Absurdo, we'll wind this up and we'll speak to you again soon. Do you want to say goodbye, Fintan, to everyone?
sure, yeah, thank you so much for having me on this. I'm very excited to listen to the other ones and hear who else you've spoken to. It's a cool project, so thank you.
Okay. Ciao.